There you go.
All right. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Scrum Master Universe, for hosting me. This is I think my second time on this side of the screen, we'll say. First time was a shared one, and this is my first time going solo. I'm sharing my screen now. Um, Excellent. So, welcome. Like Jamie said earlier, feel free to ask me questions throughout. You can put Q in the chat, and Ange will interrupt me. This is meant to be some interactive, so I'll get into that in a little bit. So, welcome to my talk on achieving predictable delivery, the power of EBM, Monte Carlo, and flow metrics, or as I like to say, how to turn your waterfall nightmares into agile delivery dreams. My name is Fred Deichler. I'm an Agile coach and international speaker based out of Grants Pass, Oregon. Andrew's also on the West Coast. Those other people on the West Coast, it's been very wet over here the past few weeks. Um, but that's been nice because it was so dry during the summer. One thing I do like to say is I enable effective and efficient teams by leveraging processes and tools to aid individuals and interactions. If we're not already connected on LinkedIn, feel free to connect with me. Please do. And when you do, just add a little comment into the connection to say you saw me here at Scrum Masters of the Universe. It helps me just filter through them when they come in. And might make sure I click it sooner. So, all right. Now I want to tell you a story. The story's titled A New Experiment Each Sprint. Now, as a Scrum Master, this was music to my ears. After many months of coaching a product owner, it had led them to proclaim this idea as their own. And then I saw how the experiments were going to be executed. And yeah, I think the Gantt chart speaks for itself. But being a good Scrum Master, I knew that my client, my team, had an outcome they had in mind. And I was going to help make sure that would happen. But I just didn't know how to do it yet. Fast forward to the weekend, and while playing some video games, I thought that I noticed something off in the horizon, a new experimenting sprint. And this idea came to my mind. There's going to be a way that I can help execute this idea of new experimenting sprint. It was embodied in a Triforce, this Triforce of predictive delivery, as I discovered, using the power of Monte Carlo forecasting, evidence-based management, and WIP limits. I was going to empower my team. All right, today you're going to need a couple things in order to be successful. This because it is a little bit interactive. The first thing is going to be some dice rolling. So if you have a six-sided die on your desk, that's great. If not, you can always Google roll a die. You can say roll a six-sided, but roll a die. It'll give you that result. There will be some die rolling in this. You're gonna need your phone. If you're on your phone, I guess you can phone in phone, but there's a couple QR codes to scan because we'll be using Miro. But I'm not gonna have you jump on the Miro board. I'll have you scan anything and do stickies from your phone. The other thing the phone is important is because you have to use the calculator function because there are a few calculations. It's not like they're complex, but it's just like trying to divide by 14 might be. If you can do that in brain, great. I cannot. Probably want something to take down some notes because you're going to be recording some results because we're going to have this interactive tool you're going to use. You're going to do some calculations, write some notes to submit up to Miro. So you'll want some paper, sticky notes. You can do it on your computer, whatever it might be. Additionally, I would say you don't have to worry about taking too many notes during this presentation or this talk today because one, it's recorded, and two, I'm going to give you a way at the end to get a copy of today's slides. All right, as you are assembling your things, we will. There we go. All right. So first, let's talk about Monte Carlo forecasting. How can we get a quick reaction in Zoom if you have used Monte Carlo forecasting, ideally in a Scrum Agile fashion? I know it's used a lot in finance, but if you've done that, give a reaction into Zoom. know if I can see those reactions. Okay, we're seeing some. So great. So if you were not familiar, Monte Carlo forecasting is coming up of its major use, is coming up on almost 100 years because it really was made popular around World War II at the Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico, because they're trying to figure out like what would happen with an atomic bomb. I know it's an interesting thing to think about, maybe a very negative thing to think about, but you had to figure out like you can't just keep launching bombs to figure out the effectiveness of them. And so instead they use math to create tens of thousands to millions of simulations of what might probabilistically happen. It also uses random sampling, and that's where we're going to bring this in to how we create predictable delivery with our Scrum and Agile teams. And if you're wondering the name, yes, it is named in honor of the Monte Carlo Casino in Monaco. I mentioned bringing this in to talk about like how we're going to forecast or predict delivery in Agile, because we want to take our historical data for us in our context of what we actually have done to attempt to predict the levels of what might happen. We want to move from this deterministic, average-based model where you're assuming everything is always going to work out the same into a probabilistic model respecting the variations in the work of your history. Now, when I first heard about Monte Carlo forecasting, I actually don't know where I first heard it. It was probably on a podcast. I'm a big podcast person. The Drunk Agile podcast. If you listen, Dan Viconte and Pratik Singh, they started talking about this. First, I've heard it, and then I picked up Dan's book. If you haven't read it, it's called Actionable Agile Metrics for Predictability and Introduction. It's very much like a college textbook. It's very deep on this subject. So if you haven't looked at it, it's a really interesting thing.
Yeah, I
So
might read that one. It's actually not as bad as a college textbook. It looks like one, but there's some great humor in there. And I think he makes some mention of his wife and some different things like that come into play. So I think it was actually more fun to read. I know I'm kind of a nerd, but it was more fun to read than most of my college textbooks. So just giving a little shout out there.
I'm not saying avoid it. Thank you, JV. Dan does have a follow-up book, and then I think another book that is coming out soon.
Yeah.
And Pratik just released a book about a year ago, also on this whole concept of predictability, which does come from them from like a Kanban perspective, but we can actually apply this into our Scrum practice if you're doing like regular iterations and releases. So I thought this was pretty neat. I tried to replicate it in spreadsheets and never was quite right. I couldn't find the right audience in order to take it with the organizations I was at the time, because I had a solution for a problem that didn't yet exist. But I knew that one day it was going to come in useful. And so, what does a Monte Carlo forecast kind of look like? So, what it is, like I said, it's thousands upon thousands of millions of simulations based on your past data of what you might do, and it splits it into these confidence intervals. We can see from this insanely awesome drawing here that I did myself. Thank you. We've run based off of the data from team, how many items they completed in a sprint, how many might they complete in the next sprint or iteration. So for this team, so like I said, instead of doing just averages, take your past performance, which reflects all of the challenges and uncertainty that is inherently in a system, to then map that out to what might happen. So over these occurrences, we see, 70% of the time in the data that got calculated, they complete 7 items. That's pretty good. But if you want more confidence, it actually goes down the ladder more, where at 5 items complete, there's 85% confidence. At 4 items, 95% confidence. And one thing I want to add in here is if you have more work in your system, like in an iteration, than those numbers, let's say you want to go for 85% confidence, which is 5 items completed, but you pull 7 items into a sprint. You're probably with confidence, you could say you're going to finish 5 items. Just can't tell you which 5. And so choosing the right 5 is very important. So what this helps us do is over a 2-week sprint, we can try to understand how much we can probabilistically do. And one of the beautiful things about this is your stakeholders, they actually understand probabilities better than averages. If you say there's an 80% chance we're going to get something done, they inherently know there's a 20% chance we won't. And then they'll ask the follow-up question, okay, what can we do to increase our certainty? So don't worry about introducing probabilities to your stakeholders, to your PO, because it's something people to hear at least to kind of understand. So how does this look beyond this awesome drawing? So what I have here is some sprint data. And I've removed some specific descriptors to protect the innocent or the guilty. Now, you've probably seen this kind of data in the past you worked with, and generally you go about summarizing. You summarize it into a table like this with story points and potentially I put PBIs, maybe just like work items completed. But what do you do with that? Historically, you probably just take those average amount, do like a 6 week rolling average to figure out your planning. But what if we did something a little bit different, respecting the variance in the data? So I said that I had previously done this with spreadsheets, and it didn't work out well for me. One, I lost my Excel license, and so I couldn't do it really with Google Sheets. But I found this website a while ago, and I love it. It's called Sevawise Games, and you can do a Monte Carlo simulation. The address is up there. Additionally, if you scan that QR code, you can get to it. And yes, I'll have this in a way in the slides that you can get at the end. So if we take our data from our sprints, we load it into this and we say, hey, get results. We're going to be presented with with a table. I've done this two different ways. First way with story points, the second way with item count. I just want to say that when doing these calculations, story points actually don't matter. It's usually a little easier to understand item count versus like, oh, we can pull in, it says we have a 80% chance that we can do 27 story points. If y'all work with story points in the past, which many of you have, you understand that 5 1 point stories does not equal 1 5 point story, no matter how many ways you slice it. When you're working with item count, I don't say, I hate saying averages, but it kind of shapes the data in a way where it actually doesn't really matter. So whatever your choice is, you can go with it. I would say my teams I support use story points for their planning purposes because it helps them. They're comfortable with it. But when I look at predicting delivery, I just count the number of issues. So one I want to point out here, these names here on the right side of the screen that you'll see. Seeing on the screen. It says, these percentage chance, and they call them bets. I generally just call them confidence intervals. It says 80% is where it says it is conservative. I'd actually probably think, in my team's 80% chance is fairly likely. I wouldn't say that's conservative. But we look at this based on this data, this team here, if I want to be fairly confident based on their past data, looking at item count, I can say, hey, there are 80% confidence that they'll get 13 items done. That feels pretty good for me. And based on the team's performance, that's when I can go back to the team to help them plan. A little drink of water. All right. You've been hearing me talk for quite a bit, but why don't we play a game? I mentioned before, writing utensil, calculate all this kind of stuff. We're gonna play a game. You are a Scrum Master for a team that builds calculators. To build a calculator requires 6 stories to get done. Those are listed on the left side. UI prototype, basic functions, so on and so forth, down to UI customizations. As you know, as a good Scrum Master, when you work with teams, sometimes things go amazingly well. Sometimes there's lots of challenge. There's variance in what happens. And that's where your die comes in. And so what we're going to do, I'm going to ask your team, each of you, to build the calculator 2 times. So you'll take a die, like if you look at the example on the right side, we'll roll a die. That first result was a 4. And that kind of comes into the average case. And so it took 3 days for this team to build the UI prototype for their calculator. Let's say I rolled a 1 or a 2. That would have been 1 day. So you go down, you roll your die 6 times, you look it up in the table here just to the left of each story, and you're going to add all those numbers up. It should be somewhere between 21 and 54 to figure out how long it took your team to be able to calculate. So that's our first result. Then you're going to take your phone out, you scan the QR code, which is going to take you to a Miro sticky option where you can add a sticky note to the board with the number of days it took. So you're going to do this 2 times. And one thing I want to mention with Monte Carlo works 2 different ways. Hey, power of twos. You can do Monte Carlo when, which is how long it's going to take something to happen probabilistically, which is what we're doing here. But for many of your teams, on a sprint by sprint basis, you can also use the same logic to do Monte Carlo how many. How many can you probabilistically do within a fixed time period? So that's really how you use Monte Carlo 2 separate ways. All right. So now it's going to get quiet. But before it gets quiet, they want to make questions around this exercise. Out of this exercise, we're going to build a large, hopefully large, data set that then we'll be able to determine our confidence intervals. All right. So why don't you go ahead? Get rolling. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat or ask out loud. Sharma asked, they're not clear on what. Yes, Sharma, you'll roll a die, and then let's and so for the first one, we roll a die. We get a result. We look it up in this little table here. So 1 day, 3 days, or 6 days, and you'll write that down on your piece of paper as how it looked, how long it took to build that piece. So you do that 6 times, and you'll add up your 6 results. Not adding up the dice results, but adding up the lookup results. Hopefully that answered your question.
So can I ask you a question?
Of course.
So when you roll a die, so for example, if it comes to 2, then what does it mean? For the UI prototype, it takes you 2 days or something?
Sorry, what did you say you rolled?
Say I have rolled a dice and it
Yeah.
comes as number 2.
Yes.
So what does that mean then? Where do I put that?
For UI prototype, that means it took your team 1 day to build that story or that function, and you'll put 1 into your first box to add up.
No, okay, so if the dice comes as 1 and 2, it's 1 day. Okay, got it.
For that one, but for basic functions, a 1 and 2 equals 2 days.
So you have to do it 6 times, right?
6 times. Yep.
Okay.
Someone posted test. Yes, it did come through. Magic to how I built the lookup table. I made it up in Miro. National Monopoly Day.
Say about any magic on how you built the lookup table?
Yeah, it's Joe S. Okay, the real magic is I was trying to come up with a concept for explaining some of this stuff, and I thought of a
What
game.
number? What
So I
number do
asked
you put in?
ChatGPT.
What number do you put in the white sticky? So, for example, if I
The sum of your 6 numbers.
or in the individual cells, right? For example, in the UI prototype under iteration 1, the white sticky. For example, if the dice roll comes to 2, then do I put 1 day or 2 over here?
You'd put 1 into the note, and then you do that 6 times and add up those 6 numbers.
So to clarify, the input for that first column, like iteration 1, is your number of days.
You don't put the die number, you put the number of days. Okay.
Number of days,
Yes.
yep.
Okay.
Thank you, Jamie.
No problem.
I see some stickies coming in.
I have a question. I must have missed the Miro link. Where can I find it?
There's no need to go to a board. If you take your phone out and you scan the QR code,
Okay.
it will take you to a little app on your phone that you can just type in the number.
Okay.
If for some reason people don't have access or it's not working, just put your number in the chat. We'll keep an eye on the chat so I can just add them into the board.
All right. Thanks.
And so if you're unclear, the activity we're doing, we're building a large data set.
So all this quietness while they're working on it. I feel like we should have some questions ready for you, Fred. Other questions.
I'm very excited.
Through.
This is the last event of this year.
That's right. That's right. I didn't mention that. So this is the last Scrum Masters of the Universe meetup this year. We're taking a break for the holidays. Although, keep an eye on LinkedIn. We'll be posting various shorts and other things just to engage with you while we're taking a break from the actual meetups. And then we're going to start strong again in January with actually Todd Miller is first up in January. So this goes right in hand with this one, right? He's a co-author of what's that book? It's some can't remember.
Evidence-based management book.
Yeah. Let me see. I got that.
I can grab the digital copy. He also wrote another one like Fixing Your Scrum.
Yeah.
Unlocking business agility with evidence-based management.
That's it.
Thank you very much.
That's it. So he's co-author of that book. So he's going to join us in January 7th, our first. So he's going to kick off the year for us.
I'll say he's smarter than me on that. Go ahead.
I am pretty jealous of Mikkel's library that he's got there. My goodness.
What library? Am I missing something?
Mikkel has on his video has a wonderful library that he's peeling these books off one at a time as we mention them and kind of holding the covers up. I'm having library envy.
All right, I'm going to move us on. If you're still doing it, great. But I want to keep an eye on the time. So hopefully now you can see a Miro board, correct?
Can see it.
So what I've done here is as these sorry, you said yes, right, Jamie?
Yes.
Okay, cool. As these stickies came in, I started sorting them. I got to sort this one here into these intervals of when they happen. And the reason this support is actually helps you then start to visualize the data. We're doing this manually, but the tooling you can use for Monte Carlo, it will do a lot of automatic. And so if we see here, we have how many stickies? We have 24 sticky notes, which is great. That's a decent sized data set. You know, I think you need either 6 or 10 pieces of data to start to build out a predictable model. The low side 6, better side 10, 24. And where this thing comes in, how you can talk about it, so we'll say these are real examples of how long it's taking your team to build a calculator. There's 24 results, which means our 50th percentile, our spot right in the middle, is between the 12th and 13th sticky. So we get, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So if we order these by size, we'll say, what it says is Our 50th percentile is actually between 34 days and 34 days. So with that, we could say we have a 50th percentile of 34 days is how long it takes us to build the calculator, which means half the time it takes us 34 days or less to build a calculator. Half the time it takes 34 days or longer. So your stakeholders might say, okay, that's great, but you're saying half the time it's going to take longer than 34 days. I need some more confidence. So with that, you can bump it up to a higher percentage. We go into 75% on a 24, between the 18th and 19th sticky. That's how we're going to get 75% confidence. That's 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So I'm counting out loud these stickies. And so what that means is between the 18th and 19th is the 18th one in our data set is 38 days. Our 19th is 40 days. So 75% confidence would be 39 days. So you can tell your stakeholder, okay, you want 75% confidence? We'll build this calculator in 39 or less days. Now, as I'm saying build a calculator, you can also think, when are we going to deliver this feature based on the fact that it has 6 stories or 6 epics within this master epic? We're saying 39 based on how long it's taken us in the past. If they continue to tell you, okay, but you're still telling me there's a 25% chance that you won't get it done in 39 days, that's not good enough. I need near certainty. So then you can go all the way up to like a 95th percentile, which is like you take all of your data of your past results. And you say, okay, well, our top one is 44, next one 42. So we're going to say 42 days. So we'd say, hey, with 95% confidence, based on everything we've done in the past, we will get this calculator done in 42 days or less. So this is a small example of Monte Carlo when. Hopefully you can see this, like I said, translate to let's say you have an epic or some larger feature in your backlog and they want to know how long it's taking and how long it's going to take. You can take other features in order to predict this out. Additionally, you could say, okay, we have 18 stories left in our backlog for this thing, and we've completed 10 so far. You can take that data from that 10 to then figure out when you probabilistically might get the rest of it done. And then you can start talking to stakeholders about what this means, which is they'll ask you that question like, okay, what can we do to increase our confidence? All right, lots of questions here, but I'm keeping an eye on the clock when I move on. So that's a little bit into Monte Carlo forecasting. Our next one we're going to talk about is evidence-based management. Once again, if you have, we talked a little bit about Todd and Ryan's book just a moment ago. But if any of you have used evidence-based management, please, you can, instead of doing a reaction in the chat, why don't you just give like a thumbs up to your video, keep your video on. Try and do a couple different things. I cannot see videos right now, so hopefully there are some thumbs up. But if you weren't aware, evidence-based management, it was created by Ken Schwaber, co-creator of Scrum, and it was actually first released in 2015. Actually, just this year, they had the 4th release of the evidence-based management guide. Now, at its core, evidence-based management is a goal-setting framework that seeks to help organizations towards their goals in this complex world using empiricism. We love empiricism. It has some similarities to OKRs, but EBM really focuses on creating value specifically in 4 key value areas. You see here on this little chart or this graphic I made. Those 4 key value areas are current value, unrealized value, ability to innovate, and time to market. Now, I'm a numbers person. When I first saw this, I'm like, ooh, ability to innovate. I got to get to know that. But once again, it was like, if we think back to Monte Carlo forecasting, it was a thing I looked into that it was a solution to a problem I didn't have yet, but I was going to be using this to solve the problem of a new experimenting sprint. So here's a much better look at the business value graphic. As you can see, those 4 key value areas. But if we zoom in to the ability to innovate, one thing I want to say, the definition of ability to innovate is that it measures, or are there measures that quantify the effectiveness of an organization in delivering new capabilities, innovation. So what are the measures that we can quantify how effective we are at delivering new capabilities? So, and that goal of ability to innovate is that it wants to maximize those abilities to deliver new capabilities. So when going through the EBM guide, there's a couple questions there too that you think about it. Just thinking about ability to innovate, which is what's preventing an organization from delivering new value, and also what prevents customers from benefiting from that innovation you just delivered. Within the guide, it does not say specifically how you might measure ability to innovate, but does give some suggestions. There's technical debt. If you have a high amount of technical debt, it does inhibit your team's ability to deliver innovation to your end users. Production incident count. Whenever there's production incidents, that takes away from a team's ability to continue to deliver new stuff. It inhibits your ability to create that new value, new capability. Active code branches, if you don't think about this one that much, what some Scrum Masters don't, actually many don't, is if you have lots of code branches, you have a lot of stale code in your repositories. And if you ever heard people on your teams complain about merging some of those, it can be quite cumbersome to have too many active code branches, which inhibits your team's ability to deliver value. But the one that really sparked my interest when I read it was just the simple thing called innovation rate. Now, innovation rate, as it's defined in the guide to the best of its ability, says it's the percentage of your effort or cost on new product capabilities divided by your overall effort. And so when I thought about this, what I thought about is like really it's bugs versus stories, or more simply, improvements versus defects, or you could say planned versus emergent. Those are all different ways to give you context that you can measure your ability to innovate. And then what I've done here is I've drawn out some crude lines of some graph of what that might look like. And one thing you'll hear from a team maybe is like, okay, our emergent work is unpredictable. Therefore, we don't know how we're going to plan around it. By using some of the same concepts from Monte Carlo forecasting, specifically confidence intervals, you can actually take a look at what you have done and predict what you might do with regards to how much of your time or how much of your effort can be devoted to innovation work versus emergent work. It's all work in the end, but like it's good to know from a planning perspective. So here we have that same summary of Jira data. One thing I've added in here is a column about the issue type. We have bug, story, task, etc. If we then summarize that again, which y'all are used to, we can start to see things where how our innovative work or our planned work goes against our emergent, unplanned bug work. We'll use that as our grounding for figuring out our innovation rate. So here I've calculated this out. So if you look at this first, oh, sorry. I saw Matt's question. That's a very deep one. I can't go into that one right now, or your comment, which I love absolutely. Is if I add up or if I take, we did 15 total items in sprint 19, 3 of them were bugs, 3 divided by 15 is 80%, or sorry, 12 divided by 15 is 80% innovation. So you see these averages kind of go around. Now, if I sort them out over these 7 sprints here and use our same confidence interval methodology, we can start to map out how often things happen. So we can say our 50% confidence rate is that we're going to have 72% innovation. But if you hear once again, oh no, that's not good enough. Okay, let's go up to 90% confidence. So we see here it's 68%. And one thing I want to call out, these numbers are very close. And that's fine that the numbers are on this one are very close because this represents the work the team did. So like 90% of the time, what it says here is 68% of their, or 70%, we'll say, of their work or sprint was devoted to innovative activities or plan versus emergent, whatever you want to say. And so for our team that wants to do new experiment sprint, we're going to say about 25% of their work is related to emergent work, 75% planned work. All right, so we got another game. Keep an eye on the clock. This one, you don't need to use Miro for, but just a little calculation game. You're going to pull back at your die for this one. This one, looking at the clock, I actually want to be sure we're not going to do this one live. Things I rambled a little too much earlier. So what I've done here, I'll explain it to you, is I have this 6 sprints of team data. Their capacity, each one of overall how much stuff did they deliver. I'm going to calculate out rolling a die what there's how many defects or unplanned work they had, and figure out how many total improvements. Divide that over their capacity to figure out their innovation rate. Just talking through this one. If I do this with my dice, this is kind of what I come up with. Very similar to that last example. We're saying sprint 1, they had a 79% innovation, sprint 3, 60% innovation, sprint 6, 84% innovation. If we take those 6 sprints worth of data, we sort the innovation rate, we can then get to our confidence intervals. So this team here, based on my dice example, of 75% confidence was 80% innovation, which means with 75% confidence, they kept very confident how they can build out their plan. Any questions about this little example of how you might calculate ability to innovate? And once again, this is not the definition that's in the book. This is my interpretation for how I look at innovation rate. All right, cool. So one thing to consider is, like, as you think about ability to innovate in your own context, how might you measure in your context what your ability to innovate or your innovation rate is, because it's very context dependent. All right, so we have a couple things here. We have a couple numbers. So we have the team is able to do 13 stories in a sprint. That's what they're from very early on. One of the first charts we showed, where I calculated out what their how many they can realistically deliver in a sprint with 75% confidence. They had 13 stories with 75% innovation rate. Once again, based off of that 75% confidence, which I know 75 is just match. We can then determine for this team what an actual experiment size is with a 75% confidence of completing. And if you do that little bit of math, it is 9 stories, 9 product backlog items, to say, gives you a 75% confidence of delivering a new experiment each sprint. So that takes care of the planning side. But what about execution? That's where that third item comes in with regards to flow metric WIP limits. And aging WIP is actually what we will be talking about. So if you weren't familiar, WIP limits, work in progress limits, they come from lean manufacturing and the Toyota production system. And one of the reasons they work so well in Agile is they help us identify bottlenecks in our system that are stopping our flow from improving our efficiency. If you've heard of this thing called Little's Law, it describes a relationship between your cycle time, your throughput, and how many work in progress items you have. So based on this, like, I had heard that, hey, if the number of in progress items goes up unbounded and the throughput remains the same, your cycle time starts going up. Oh wow, I gave myself a thumbs up on on whatever Zoom. And one thing we like to say about WIP limits is, when you're talking about them, one of the core concepts is how do we stop starting and start finishing? And the way we do that is by focusing on aging WIP. Here, I want to tell you a story about a team I was working with. This is some data I pulled from Actionable Agile, which is a plugin for Jira. I think they have an Azure plugin. You can also use it offline. I'm not sponsored by them, but I've used this in order to model some of this out. So if we take a look at this chart here, we have our green line is our cycle time that measures against the right axes. So at top, it's about 12 days of cycle time. Near the bottom, closer to 6. We have our daily work in progress, which is the red dashed line, and the throughput at the bottom. Those go both against the left axes. I want to draw your attention to this first inflection point. This is when the product team asked the team to start pushing themselves. This is before I joined the team. It said we need to get that. We have this delivery date we need to meet, and so we need to work harder. We need to work more. And so when the team heard this, they started doing more work. They started working at, we'll say, an unsustainable pace. They starting like as soon as they got blocked, they just jumped on the next item in queue instead of getting things unblocked. And initially, by doing this, we see shortly thereafter that push, their work in progress went up, but also their cycle time went down because they were working more. Very interesting thing about cycle time is if you work more hours in a day, your cycle time can go down because you're not measuring it against like normal working days. But as I said, it became an unsustainable pace. We see right around here when the cycle time started going up, almost unbounded to follow that work in progress. I started talking to the team about how we focus on our aging work in progress. The aging work in progress, if you aren't aware, these are the items that's been the longest since you started them. Therefore, you probably have the most amount invested in them. They're also probably ones that maybe are closest to getting done. So I started talking to the team, instead of bringing in new stuff, why don't we start focusing on completing the stuff that we started the longest time ago? This includes, doing some group program, mob program, pair programming, getting your Scrum master involved to help unblock some impediments. Now, cycle time is a lagging metric, meaning it takes a little while for things to work through the system. But so we can see is as soon as we start focusing on aging work in progress, our work in progress started going down because we started getting stuff done. And then with that, cycle time started going down. So what that means is we are then able to start less things, finish them quicker, get feedback quicker. Now, I had heard in the past that whip limits were this great thing, but I'd never actually seen it work out until I had this example where I had actual data of like, hey, focusing on limiting whip or focusing aging work in progress does have a tangible effect on delivery. It was all theory until I actually had my practical examples for this. And one thing of note of this little black line along the bottom, which is our throughput, which is how many items we're getting done per day, that stayed pretty steady throughout this entire thing. Even when they're pushing, they were getting less than 2 things done per day. And when we implemented aging whip and whip limits, they were still getting between 1 and 2 things done per day. So when we think about Little's law, it can hold true that throughput remaining like as your work in progress and cycle time fluctuate against each other, your throughput can remain the same. Now, I want to point out a couple tools that you can use to manage your aging work in progress. On the left, we have is from Actionable Agile. If you have this, great. What this does, it breaks down your different stages of your development, and you can see the ones that have been aged the longest. They're the ones that are up in that high high up on the list. So it was, we have some items for this team here. They had been working on for 37 days. It was in the review column. And it was like the thing is, you're like, oh, it's in review, it's in someone else's hand. As long as it's active on your board, it's still a little bit in your mind until you deliver it. You're still thinking about it a little bit. So how do we also clear up the mental space of the team? So that's one way to do it. Additionally, if you're using Jira, a couple of years ago, they introduced insights on your board. If you're using Jira Cloud, you can just pop that thing open and it will help you identify items that are taking longer than on average. But if you don't have Actionable Agile, you don't use Jira, you're just using sticky notes on the board, you can put little dots on them for every day since you started it. You can also, if you're a team that loves bananas, every day when you start or not every day, whenever you start a new ticket, peel the banana, put it up on the wall. You'll start seeing the banana peel will start rotting over time. Hey, we got to take care of that brown one before it turns black. That's one way to think about it, but there's different ways you can think about the stuff that you started the longest ago. So now the pieces are coming together. And so what we have here is we talked about our planning side and our execution side. And this will be a little bit interactive. I'm asking in the chat here to line up which practices go with planning versus your implementation side. So we have number 1, that's your Monte Carlo forecasting. Number 2 says aging work in progress. And number 3 is your innovation rate. So in the chat, why don't you just type like, maybe it's A2, B3, C1. Just go ahead, type in the chat where you would put those practices into your process. One, three, A, B. Absolutely. Thank you, Mike. It's a great, great way. And what I want to say here is none of these practices come from the Scrum Guide or the SAFe framework. One thing that'll make you more successful as Scrum Master is continuing to grow. You're here today. This is a great growth opportunity. Learn new patterns and practices to apply when your team's organization need them. And there we go. A1, B3, and C2. And if you do these kind of things, you're going to have a happy Scrum Master and a happy product owner. So here it is, that Triforce, those 3 practices to achieving predictability: Monte Carlo forecasting, evidence-based management, and it says WAIT, WIP limits. That's an old graphic. We'll say aging WIP. And to land those, EBM helps us understand how much of our work is dedicated to innovation. Monte Carlo, how many work items can we probably do in a sprint? And with WIP limits and aging WIP, stop starting, start finishing. Now, I mentioned earlier, I can get a copy of the slides here. I have a great way to do it. Pull out your phone, scan this QR code. I'm going to ask you for a little bit of feedback because I love doing this kind of talks. I love doing this kind of stuff. But, the way I get better at this, I get feedback. So once you scan this QR code, if you can't scan the QR code, you can go to talk.ic/Fred Deichler and put in SMOTU 1119. That's Scrum Master Universe 1119. So we'll do that. And as my gift to you for filling out the survey, you will get a copy of today's slides.
That's great stuff, Fred. I think, does anybody have any questions while you're kind of doing that? Any questions that came up? I think we handled them all in the chat. I know there was some ongoing discussion in the chat about, predictability versus deterministic, or predictive.
I'm going to save this chat because I want to go back and read some of these conversations. And thank you, everyone who contributed to those conversations on there. The QR code on the right side under my picture is the one to the survey. On the left side is just a one to connect with me on LinkedIn. Once again, put something like SMOTU in the connection request. But yeah, what questions do we got?
All right. And
how do we get an access to the slides?
Fill out the survey, that QR code on the right side. It's going to ask you 5 simple questions, and as a thank you, it'll email you the slides.
Very good. Very cool. What other questions do you have for Fred today? I think this is exactly where we need to be when we're talking about getting rid of story points, which most organizations don't like that idea, but the math works out. I've done a story I have is a team that I was working with. I did a actual Agile chart for them for cycle time. And what I did is I displayed points. I changed the color of the dots according to how many points they were, right? So 2 points maybe got green, 3 points, 5 points, right, and so forth on the Fibonacci sequence. And what it showed, it was interesting because the dots, you could have a 2-point story that took 1 day. You can also have a 2-point story that took 7 days. You can have a 5-point story that took 1 day, or a 5-point story taking a lot of time, right? There was no correlation between the point estimate and how long it took to complete that. And so then you think about how is that even possible to use that to, it's like we're throwing numbers at the wall a little bit when we're using story pointing, I guess. It doesn't, the math doesn't line up.
Yeah,
I like-
exactly. I mean, if you do a scatter plot, even I did that experiment a couple of years back.
That's what I used, I
take
think, scatter plot. Exactly.
It absolutely shows no correlation.
Yep. Then it's more eye-opening, isn't it? You're like, whoa.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I want to comment. I like what Mike put in here, which is sometimes have problem convincing some people, POs, of trying new things. I mean, you got to use this card very infrequently. You know, there's actually two things. First, I say, you know, what's the worst would happen? What that could happen by trying something? Is this good enough for now? Safe enough to try? Second thing is like, can you show me the time when a burn up, burn down chart or a Gantt chart was correct after the fact? If they can show you that, that'd be. But sorry, that's being a little bit mean. But the only time a Gantt chart is correct is when it's first created. Every time after that's incorrect.
Yeah.
And one thing I want to add in here for people still around is if you start doing probabilistic forecasting to determine the delivery of like a feature, is incumbent upon you with every iteration, reforecast. New data points come in, whether it's the size of what's left, or maybe there's a change on the team or something, reforecast. All right, so we are right at the top of the hour. I want to pass it back over to Jamie and Ange. Thank you for letting me have the stage here. It was fun to have the mic.
Yeah. Thank you, Fred, for joining us today. This has been great. We've enjoyed it thoroughly. Now I'm gonna give you a challenge here, Fred, to create your next talk. We want to have you back. We would love to have you back. So there's our homework for you. And
Okay.
we will see you next year. That would be awesome.
Absolutely.
Thanks to all of you for coming. And like I said, keep watching us on LinkedIn. We'll post things. I've already posted Todd Miller's meetup on our meetup page, so you can sign up now. I just posted that a little bit ago. Otherwise, reach out if you want. If you just want to chat or have any feedback for us, or if there's anything that we can help you with, feel free to reach out. If you know another good speaker, I would love to hear about it and bring that person here. So, all right, gang, have a great day. Have a happy holidays wherever you are and however you celebrate. Enjoy this time of year. Appreciate it. Bye, guys.
Thank you. Cheers, bye.
Bye. Thank you.